Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer. Corporations in the United States have been quietly stealing every bit of your private information that they can get their hands on, and they've been doing it for years. And now that they've gotten everyone accustomed to handing over their personal data, they've put their data grab on steroids to the point where you can't even buy a car without the automaker wanting to track your every move. Tonight, we'll tell you all the ways that corporations are tracking you and what personal information you might be handing over to them, often without your knowledge. Then later in the show, I'll talk with you about newly released documents from the October 1st Las Vegas shooting that could impact the lawsuits filed by survivors in a major way. Don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts right now.
This is a classic whistleblower case within the pharmaceutical fraud. Democracy is convinced by this company what you're doing is wrong.
Ever since the passage of the Patriot Act, American citizens have been living in a perpetual state of uncertainty about whether or not the government is collecting their private data. And with all of the recent talks about FISA courts and domestic surveillance, that uncertainty has almost turned into a fear that we're living in a George Orwell novel. But the whole time that we've been worried about the government collecting our data without our knowledge, we've willfully been allowing private corporations to do just that. We turn on our smartphones, allow our apps to access our location at all times, and we buy products online from companies that store our data and use it to send us targeted advertisements. While all that may seem harmless, it all helps to erode our rights to privacy. And that's just the beginning. Recently, news emerged about how car makers are adding features to their vehicles that allow them to constantly track your location, find out where you go each day, what products you buy, and even more personal information about your body type. They track every part of our driving habits, from how fast we drive to how hard we apply the brakes, and there's no limit to what these car makers can and will do with this private information. And the worst part of it all is that we're giving them this private data willfully. Buried in the contracts of many new purchases by car purchases are clauses that say you're willing to let car companies track and store this data about yourself. And if you don't want to sign, you don't get to buy their product. Big Brother is alive and well in the United States. We're just too busy to think about how active it is in taking our private information. Joining me to talk about this is Holland Cooke, the host of The Big Picture. Holland, tell us exactly what all automakers are doing in terms of collecting our data. This story is incredible because most people have no idea what the facts are.
It's not as bad as you say. It's worse. And coming from radio, this is something I've been following closely because radio has traditionally been king in the car, and with all these new tech dashboards, we have new competition. Here is a figure that will blow your mind, and I had to double check this. The first space shuttle, not the Mercury capsule, the shuttle, had 500,000 lines of software code, and the Ford Motor Company projects that by 2020, your car is going to have 100 million lines of code in it. Think black box, like when an airplane goes down. It's actually orange, but it's a bunch of microprocessors and sensors that are collecting the kind of behavioral data you mentioned, even body types. Who is sitting in which seats, which has some implications should babies and young children be in the back seat, et cetera. But all of this stuff can be analyzed in real time. They are actually tracking you. And if your car is newer than 10 years or so, they're following your every move. And the newer models can track eye movements, the weight issue you mentioned,
Yeah.
whether the driver's hands are on the wheel. But as you also mentioned, the genie's already out of the bottle before you get in the car, because your smartphone is constantly reporting as well. So buried in all that fine print you mentioned, you know, that's where the giveaway is.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Why would these corporations, I mean, I think I know the answer, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but why would these corporations even need to know all of this information that they're collecting? I mean, it's not because they're trying to make your life better. It has to do with marketing. It has to do with money. If a corporation is involved and they want information, it always has to do with them making more money. What's your take on that?
Well, that's obviously number one. There are some benign reasons that they will cite about fuel efficiency, et cetera, but they want to sell your data. They want to sell your identity and tell corporations what you're up to. And it's not just corporations. Think about these toll gantries. You've tracked me down this week in Providence, Rhode Island, where they're just starting to put up gantries that are going to toll trucks. And by statute, that's all they're allowed to do. But in the back of your mind, you're wondering, if you go from gantry to gantry too quick, are you going to get a speeding ticket in the mail? It's not just here. I got nabbed in Washington, D.C., where the speed limit suddenly goes down 10 miles an hour, and the next thing, snap, and you get a ticket in the mail. So we are being tracked, but not just by corporations. And money is the bottom line. Every municipality's budget is stretched thin, so the more fines they can issue, the more tolls they can levy, the better off they are.
Well, look, it sounded like crazy talk when people started thinking, oh, well, my Syria might be listening, my Alexa might be listening. It sounded like crazy talk at first, and then all of a sudden we found out it wasn't crazy talk. There was no speculation. It wasn't crazy talk. They were listening to private conversations in your home, listening to private conversations in your car. So we know that. That's not speculation anymore. And so the real question comes down to, why are people willing to give their personal information as if there's no problem with that? What is your take?
I think it's info overload. We just check off the box. And you mentioned a minute ago how when you buy the car, the super small font fine print is your assent for them to be collecting this data. And we've grown up in the last couple decades in an internet for free culture. We assume that we can get whatever we want out there, so we just check off the box. And whenever something seems to be free, you are the product. On my October 13 show, we had John McAfee on. And you can find the show on YouTube, and if you watch it, you will immediately start deleting apps from your smartphone because we have let the fox into the hen house in a very gradual way.
I don't think Americans, if you look at it, I don't think it's that Americans have become just too numb to this information grab. I think they're accepting of it. I think part of the concept is, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'd like to have the best I can get of products that are out there. I don't mind them communicating with me. It is really a cultural shift that a baby boomer might look at and say, I don't buy into that. But I think you've got an entire upcoming generation that honestly doesn't care. And I'm wondering why they should care. If you're to give the best argument about why they should care, Holland, what would your argument be?
Well, I agree with you. It's easy enough to shrug, hey, you want to spy on me, I'll put you to sleep. I'm the most boring person I know. But take this to its logical conclusion. It's that Tom Cruise movie Minority Report, where they are following you in a cyber way to sell you stuff, maybe to fine you or toll you, but you've really lost control of your circumstances and ultimately of a lot of your do-re-mi. And it often backfires because, have you noticed that when you buy something, you've already made the purchase, then you start getting marketing for it because they have ascertained that you have interest in that. To them, that is useless data. To us, it just seems relevant. There is an affinity on Amazon where every time you go to Amazon.com, you find interesting stuff, because they know what the other people who purchased what you have purchased also liked. And this was Jeff Bezos's dream, is that you'd go there and spot something that you've always wanted and you never knew it.
Yeah, I write fiction books. And as a fiction writer, I'm always doing searches. I did a search one time about what's the easiest way to break into a car, because I had a character that has to break into a car. And for days I was getting... I was getting bombarded by how I can go about breaking into a car. And I'm just wondering what law enforcement was thinking about that. So there are some downsides to it. But I think the end game for corporate America is that, you know, corporate America is letting government collect all this. This is what everybody's missing. Government is collecting most of this information. And then they're asking people like Amazon to be a contractor for them, you see. Then Amazon is a contractor. They don't really do this because they're concerned about national security. Bezos could not give a darn less about national security. His idea is he makes $1 gazillion from the CIA and the government spying on people various kinds of ways. But he's a contractor. And he not only makes money from the government, he makes money from that material that targets you with information. People don't seem to care about that. They want Bezos to become a trillionaire by knowing everything he can about you for whatever reasons he wants. What's your take? Did I overstate that?
Well, no, not at all. In fact, what you just said might surprise a lot of people, because when you think Amazon, you think online shopping. They're getting a lot of attention now because they bought Whole Foods and they're going to start delivering. Lately, they have rocked the insurance industry because they threatened to go into health care. And whenever you see the words Amazon and prescription drugs in the same sentence, you watch CVS stock go down. Everybody knows that part. What a lot of people don't realize, which you just said, is that they are a huge government contractor leasing out IP, information protocol, and server space, and running the government software. So they're tapped in.
Right. Holland, let's pick up with this conversation another time. Thanks for joining me. There's so much to talk about where it comes to government and corporations spying on us. Thanks for joining me. Coming up, never-before-seen information about the Las Vegas shooting was just released to the public. When we come back, you'll find out how that could impact ongoing lawsuits from survivors who seek to hold MGM and others liable for the October attack. That's next.
The mission of News with Ed is to go to the people, tell their side of the story. Our stories are well-sourced. We don't hide anything from the public, and I don't think the mainstream media in this country can say that.
I think the average viewer knows that RT America has a different perspective, so that we're not hearing one echo chamber that mainstream media is constantly spewing.
We're not beholden to any corporate sponsor. No one tells us what to cover, how long to cover it, or how to say it. That's the beauty of RT America. We give both sides, we hear from both sides, and we question more. That's journalism. Not letting anything get in your way and bringing it home to the American people.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, what would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? It can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q Larry.
Question more.
It's been 4 months since the deadly Las Vegas shooting, and yet the survivors and families of those who did not survive are still facing major legal challenges. In the last weeks, many new revelations have come about after a federal judge released hundreds of court documents to the public. On top of that, a different judge just ordered the Las Vegas Police Department to release all digital records that were contained about that shooting October 1st. Joining me to talk about that is attorney Robert Eglett. Robert, what new things have been discovered that's going to help this lawsuit go forward?
Well, there's been radio silence from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for months. For days following the shooting and for weeks following the shooting, there were routine briefings to the press about what was going on in the investigation. And then because there was some misinformation that had come out initially, some time tables were off, timing of different incidents were off, or mistakes were made, the police department here basically just shut down all information to the public. The press has been working tirelessly here through court proceedings to try to get more information released. They've now had a lot of success recently, so now we're finally getting a lot of the information that you think would have been released much earlier to the public. They have taken the position
Robert,
that there was an
What was that silence
Mike.
about? It doesn't make any sense that you'd have silence about a tragedy like this. The more information that's out there, the better people are able to proceed. What in the world is the justification for silence to begin with before this judge ordered them, no, do what you're supposed to do and put this information out there? What was the rationale?
Our local sheriff's department was taking the position that it was an ongoing investigation, and therefore it was imperative, because they had an ongoing investigation, that they shouldn't have to release information to the public that may affect their ongoing investigation. Of course, the other side that we were arguing, well, the shooter is dead. There's been no evidence to show that there was more than one shooter, so why is this information not being released? Finally, the courts have intervened and started forcing the police department to release this information to the public.
MGM Properties was said to have botched their response to the security guard that was shot by Paddock. Now it's reported that MGM personnel had many interactions with the shooter in days leading up to this attack. MGM says they were normal interactions, but lawyers say it's hard to believe that these were normal interactions. What's your take on that, Robert? Well,
I mean, it's hard to say these are normal interaction. Steve Paddock had checked into this, to these two rooms, this suite, days and days before this incident happened. There was security camera of him bringing in dozens of very, very large suitcases or trunks, using the service elevators on most of the occasions, and by himself without other hotel personnel there, and sometimes other hotel personnel assisting him bringing these bags up. He was literally bringing these bags up, then leaving the hotel, driving back to his house an hour north of Las Vegas in Mesquite, and picking up more guns, more ammunition that was packed in these suitcases, and bringing them back to the hotel, to the point where he'd brought something north of a dozen of these large suitcases up. This behavior in itself was strange. He wasn't a conventionaire who was bringing stuff for a convention there. He was a guest. He was a high roller. Why is he bringing all of these heavy items, and why are they being allowed to be brought up?
Robert, I think the operative word is high roller. They spread out a lot of tips in places like that. They hand out chips. They hand out money. And, you know, that's kind of an ingratiating process that, as I look at the facts of this case, it looks like that took place right here. You filed a case last week against Steve Wynn. Are you able to talk about that?
Well, that's in the early stages. In fact, just came from a hearing. That's why I was delayed today. But it's a derivative lawsuit against Steve Wynn and the board of directors of Wynn Resorts for their failure to provide proper oversight of Wynn as the CEO, and allow this, this continuing systemic activity of sexual assaults and inappropriate sexual behavior go on by the chief executive for the Wynn Properties for decades.
Right. You're kind of known as the lawyer to see out in Las Vegas. And the reason I ask you about the Wynn case is, together with, you're kind of the person leading the charge against MGM. Now you've got Wynn involved. Do you feel like you're a little bit of a target out there in Vegas, because you definitely are pushing back on this MGM case? You're developing facts that nobody else has developed. What is your take? I know you're used to conflict, you're used to controversy, but I think this is a big effort, both in the Wynn case and in this MGM shooting case. You see repercussions from that type of thing sometimes, don't you?
Well, I mean, I'm used to that. When we had the largest medically caused hepatitis C outbreak in U.S. history here in Las Vegas. I was the lead counsel who pursued that litigation and to ultimate resolution after 3 or 4 trials and more than $1.5 billion in verdicts. I'm used to adversary. I'm used to the being pushed back by casinos. I've been in the business of suing these casino properties for 30 years for some of the negligence and misconduct that goes on there. You know, it's nothing new to me, so it's the same old process that we've seen here for 30 years.
Let me be clear, there are people probably all over the United States that have been affected by this shooting case. Families are spread out all over this country that have been affected by it. Are you taking cases from all parts of the country and consolidating them in Las Vegas, or what is your approach to this case?
So this case, the cases themselves will not be consolidated into one lawsuit. They'll be filed as separate lawsuits. And yes, we're taking cases from all over the country for both families of victims who lost their life on 1 October, as well as people who were severely injured from shooting injuries, as well as being trampled in the mayhem that occurred there afterwards. They'll be coordinated in an effort. The cases will be coordinated here in our state courts. There'll be a presiding judge. But each of the cases will be handled individually, and that's how we're handling these cases. And right now, I'm leading the charge. I'm leading the attorneys around the country who are presenting these cases. We've already had one organizational meeting in my office. We have another one scheduled for next month, and we're proceeding in due course, and at the right time, at the right place, we'll be filing these lawsuits collectively.
Robert, I've followed your career many years. You're always there on the biggest of the big cases. You always seem to pull it out. A lot of people are counting on you for this one, so good luck out there. If I'm taking a bet, since we're talking about Las Vegas, I would say MGM has a lot to worry about. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
The U.S. House of Representatives just introduced a bill that's going to eliminate several federal financial aid programs for university students. The House is expected to vote on the bill within the next couple of months, and if it goes through, many students who depend on financial aid for their higher education are going to lose that money. Joining me is Molly Barrows to talk about this problem. She's legal journalist for Trial Lawyer magazine, and the legal angle on this is pretty obvious. Not only do we have a situation where students that have loans, they already are in a situation, if they can't make payments, they find themselves in a tough situation and have to declare bankruptcy. They can't even get protection in bankruptcy court. They can't escape the problem as it is.
You're exactly right. And so here we are with the House in the process of trying to overhaul the Higher Education Act. And among the proposals that they're making are eliminating the student public service loan forgiveness. So if you graduate, you pay on your loan for 10 years in good faith, you're making good progress, you get a job with a government agency or a nonprofit, then you get your loans forgiven. So it's essentially equivalent of forgiving their debt. Well, they want to eliminate that. They also want to make changes to other programs that would put less restrictions on for-profit colleges and institutions and more accountability measures, go figure, on non-for-profit. So the ones that utilize a lot of these grants are going to see things like, for instance, if you receive $600 million in annual grants for a minority-serving institution, you got to show that 25% of your kids are going to graduate or transfer. So
and let
more
me get
pressure
this right.
on them.
Yeah, let me get this right. So we just gave the military $200 billion. We gave the military $200 billion. They didn't even want $200 billion, but we gave them $200 billion.
Because we're pushing defense.
Exactly. We just did a tax cut, which took away from the process of available money over $1 trillion. Now we're talking about infrastructure of another $1.2 trillion. We know who loses here and who wins. the banks win in a big way here, don't they, Molly?
Absolutely, and the for-profit colleges are going to win as well, because they're going to have, it's going to make it even easier for other institutions that also want to offer for-profit, degrees, if you will. But there'd been some accountability before. You couldn't necessarily apply for some of these student loan programs if you were a for-profit college without, jumping through certain hoops. And now they want to tighten those loopholes, or actually, I should say, loosen those loopholes so that they don't have those restrictions anymore.
I mean, this is the legal take on it, though. I mean, when this is legal programming. The legal take is you used to be able to find some protection for a student who's buried in bills, doesn't have a job, is being, hunted down by the lending agency. You had some things you could do. You had the threat of bankruptcy. That's gone.
Yes.
You had the ability to say, look, if you don't negotiate with us, mediate it, whatever, we're going to declare bankruptcy, and you're going to lose all of it. That's gone, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, it's absolutely. And it was already difficult enough for students to declare bankruptcy, because they were basically, you couldn't discharge a student loan unless you could prove extenuating circumstances, and under certain requirements like extenuating circumstances and at least showing a good faith effort to pay. It was already difficult to do that. And most of the time, student loans were not forgiven in bankruptcy.
So let me guess who's pushing this right now. The banking industry loves it, of course. The private colleges and institutions love it. The universities are fighting for their lives. Is that right?
Absolutely, and those are the advocacy groups that support those folks that want more access to higher education and affordable higher education, as well as rules in place that ensure that when a kid does go to school to get a degree, that it's going to be in a job that they can get gainful employment. They're also trying to make adjustments to that rule as well.
Well, the ugly thing about this isn't Republican or Democrat. This is being pushed by both sides.
It's actually predominantly being pushed by Republicans in the House. Now, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is also supporting this, unfortunately, and the White House is supporting this as well. The saving grace is that in the Senate, well, I say the saving grace for those who don't want to see these changes made to the extent that they're being proposed through the House
is the Senate,
because they haven't started work on their overhaul yet.
Let's hope. Molly, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Pat.
And finally tonight, some good news. A top financial executive was resentenced to 7 years in prison for selling millions of dollars worth of phony loans. The story began after the U.S. Justice Department announced a plan to take down crooked mortgage lenders that helped create the housing crisis of 2008. A federal investigation concluded that David McCloskey and his company, First Atlantic Financial, brokered $33 million in fraudulent loans. They said his loan applications contained false information about a borrower's income, which were supported by fake documents that he and others at Atlantic Financial doctored up. In fact, all of Wall Street doctored up these kinds of documents, not just this guy. But the prosecutor in this case determined that McCloskey was motivated by pure greed, as all of Wall Street was motivated by the same thing. But McCloskey says he's innocent and even tried to deflect some of the blame on his mom. The prosecutor wanted McCloskey to serve 10 years in prison, but his resentencing will make him serve only 7. Most banking executives don't ever go to jail for the crimes they commit, so 7 years may not be 10, but it's a good start. But take note, plenty of bankers up on Wall Street committed the same crime and never saw the inside of a prison. That's all for tonight. Be sure to check out our website at al.law, where you can talk with an attorney about any of the stories we cover on this show. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/RT America's Lawyer. You can watch all RT America programs on DirecTV channel 321. I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer, where every week we tell you stories that corporate media is ordered not to tell because their advertisers won't let them. Have a great night.
Is going to have 100 million lines of code in it. Think black box, like when an airplane goes down. It's actually orange, but it's a bunch of microprocessors and sensors that are collecting the kind of behavioral data you mentioned, even body types. Who is sitting in which seats, which has some implications should babies and young children be in the back seat, etc. But all of this stuff can be analyzed in real time. They are actually tracking you. And if your car is newer than 10 years or so, they're following your every move. And the newer models can track eye movements, the weight issue you mentioned, whether the driver's hands are on the wheel. But as you also mentioned, the genie's already out of the bottle before you get in the car, because your smartphone is constantly reporting as well. So buried in all that fine print you mentioned, you know, that's where the giveaway is.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Why would these corporations, I mean, I think I know the answer. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But why would these corporations even need to know all of this information that they're collecting? I mean, it's not because they're trying to make your life better. It talks about FISA courts and domestic surveillance, that uncertainty has almost turned into a fear that we're living in a George Orwell novel. But the whole time that we've been worried about the government collecting our data without our knowledge, we've willfully been allowing private corporations to do just that. We turn on our smartphones, allow our apps to access our location at all times, and we buy products online from companies that store our data and use it to send us targeted advertisements. While all that may seem harmless, it all helps to erode our rights to privacy. And that's just the beginning. Recently, news emerged about how car makers are adding features to their vehicles that allow them to constantly track your location, find out where you go each day, what products you buy, and even more personal information about your body type. They track every part of our driving habits, from how fast we drive to how hard we apply the brakes, and there's no limit to what these car makers can and will do with this private information. And the worst part of it all is that we're giving them this private data willfully. Buried in the contracts of many new purchases by car purchases are clauses that say you're willing. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer. Corporations in the United States have been quietly stealing every bit of your private information that they can get their hands on, and they've been doing it for years. And now that they've gotten everyone accustomed to handing over their personal data, they've put their data grab on steroids to the point where you can't even buy a car without the automaker wanting to track your every move. Tonight, we'll tell you all the ways that corporations are tracking you and what personal information you might be handing over to them, often without your knowledge. Then later in the show, I'll talk with you about newly released documents from the October 1st Las Vegas shooting that could impact the lawsuits filed by survivors in a major way. Don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts right now.
This is a classic whistleblower case within the pharmaceutical industry. Fraud. Democracy is funded by this company. What you're doing is wrong.
Ever since the passage of the Patriot Act, American citizens have been living in a perpetual state of uncertainty about whether or not the government is collecting their private data. And with all of the reason to let car companies track and store this data about yourself, and if you don't want to sign, you don't get to buy their product. Big Brother is alive and well in the United States. We're just too busy to think about how active it is in taking our private information. Joining me to talk about this is Holland Cooke, the host of The Big Picture. Holland, tell us exactly what all automakers are doing in terms of collecting our data. This story is incredible because most people have no idea what the facts are.
It's not as bad as you say. It's worse. And coming from radio, this is something I've been following closely, because radio has traditionally been king in the car, and with all these new tech dashboards, we have new competition. Here is a figure that will blow your mind, and I had to double check this. The first space shuttle, not the Mercury capsule, the shuttle, had 500,000 lines of software code, and the Ford Motor Company projects that by 2020, your car...
It has to do with marketing. It has to do with money. If a corporation is involved and they want information, it always has to do with them making more money. What's your take on that?
Well, that's obviously number one. There are some benign reasons that they will cite about fuel efficiency, et cetera, but they want to sell your data. They want to sell your identity and tell corporations what you're up to. And it's not just corporations. think about these toll gantries. You've tracked me down this week in Providence, Rhode Island, where they're just starting to put up gantries that are going to toll trucks. And by statute, that's all they're allowed to do. But in the back of your mind, you're wondering, if you go from gantry to gantry too quick, are you going to get a speeding ticket in the mail? It's not just here. I got nabbed in Washington, D.C., where the speed limit suddenly goes down 10 miles an hour, and the next thing, snap, and you get a ticket in the mail. So we are being tracked, but not just by corporations. And money is the bottom line. Every municipality's budget is stretched thin, so the more fines they can issue, the more tolls they can levy, the better off they are.